I have never set foot in Cuba, but the island holds a special place in my heart. I've never experienced the direct effects of the revolution, but I have seen its effects in the struggles of those I love. My maternal grandparents were born in Cuba and were children during the revolution. On January 1st, 1959, their lives changed. One by one, like collapsing dominoes, rights were taken away from the Cuban people by the newly established Castro's government. Before the revolution, Cuba was Latin America's third richest country. In the 1950s, U.S. citizens had invested $1 billion in Cuba in mines, sugar plantations, cattle ranches, etc. However, things were not perfect. There was a large lower class, mainly made up of blacks, mulattoes, and Spanish immigrants. Castro's revolution was preceded by the oppressive dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. This oppressive government created the ideal breeding ground for a revolution. On July 26, 1953, the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba were attacked by a group led by a young leader named Fidel Castro. Fidel and his followers were captured and sentenced to 1 year in prison. After Fidel was released from prison, he went to Mexico, where he partnered with an Argentine named Che Guevara. On December 2nd, 1956, Fidel Castro and his followers rowed the boat named Grandma into Niquero, Cuba, and hid in the Sierra Maestra Mountains. On June 28, 1958, Batista launched Operation Verano to capture Castro. Despite having few men, Castro and his men won most of the battles, devastating the Cuban military. On August 8, 1958, all of Castro's men escaped the Sierra Maestra Mountains. The Cuban rebels made their way to Havana on January 1, 1959. The Cuban government surrendered. Castro promised democracy but created a dictatorship.
Salvar la revolución en Cuba. Salvar el socialismo en Cuba.
In 1959, Castro's government passed the Agrarian Reform Law. It became the foundation of the new government. This made it illegal to own more than 1,000 acres of land. Offenders of the law would get their land confiscated. The Cuban government gave the land it took away to 200,000 peasants. One of the largest confiscations of land was that of a cattle ranch owned by King Ranch of Texas. The ranch had over 8,000 heads of cattle worth over $3 million. In 1960, the Urban Reform Law was passed, which allowed the government to dictate how much property owners could charge for rent, sell their homes for, and how many homes they could own. Homes were taken away from people and given to the poor. My great-grandfather, Miguel Saavedra, worked very hard from the time he was a child. Although he was born in extreme poverty, through his hard work, he was able to buy a historic cattle ranch with 100 heads of cattle and 5 homes. He lost everything to the revolution.
Cuando tomó el poder, pues ya tú sabes, fue quedándose primero con las casas que no iban a pagar 5 años. Después que se quedaron con la finca, con el ganado, hasta que se quedaron con todo. La tienda me la intervinieron. Me vendieron una compra de 1,800 pesos por mediodía sería. Y por la noche me pidieron la llave de la tienda.
El gobierno te la pidió.
El gobierno la cogió. Hubo que empezar a hacer la vida de nuevo.
The agrarian and urban reforms shifted the responsibility to maintain and distribute property from the people to the government. It deprived the Cuban people from the responsibility to maintain property. The results of this are evident in Havana, where there are many buildings in ruins. In 1959, an amendment was passed to the Agrarian Reform Law, which allowed the government to confiscate most sugarcane plantations. Finally, in 1966, all businesses were nationalized in Cuba. The government has total control over the retail industry. An example is the government-run bodega. Everyone has to buy their food from these government markets. Everyone gets a libreta or ration book. People are not allowed to buy anything that is not listed in the libreta. The Cuban economy has suffered greatly because the government has removed the self-interest component which fuels the growth of economies. Cubans do not have much incentive for working hard because there is no monetary incentive and no freedom to spend the money earned. Cubans are not free to express their own opinion, and those that are perceived as anti-revolutionaries can receive some harsh punishments. Shortly after Castro assumed power, Raúl Castro ordered the execution of 75 Batista followers who were executed by machine gun at the edge of a mass grave. My grandfather, José León, was a political prisoner for 4 years in the Oriente Province prison.
Yo estoy cogiendo la sopa y hay uno que está detrás de mí que al pasar el brazo me da un golpe en el codo. Yo tengo ya el plato lleno, se derrama y se le cae arriba al guardia. Aquello fue que no hubo explicación para darle. Yo, cuando me llevaban al orden interior, yo le dije, pero mire, el jefe de la prisión que fue el que me entrevistó ahí, yo no tengo explicación que darle de eso más que fue una cosa involuntaria. Pero ¿cómo involuntaria? 18 días en una celda de castigo. Una celda de castigo que sería del tamaño de la mesa esta. O sea, el flor de la celda sería como el tamaño de esta mesa. Prácticamente acostado cabía en las esquinas así cruzado. Y durante el día había que estar ahí desnudo completamente. Entonces te pasaban la comida por una cosa que había en el piso, como la cosa que hay en el correo para echar las cartas. Por ahí te metían la comida. Cuando te iban a bañar a las 4 de la tarde, te pasaban por encima de una puerta sólida de metal. Había un hoyo, pasaban una manguera y ahí te ponían la manguera esa, 5 minutos a bañarte y rápido.
All media in Cuba is government owned and operated. Negative events happening in the island are never reported on. Negative events happening elsewhere, especially in the US, are overly emphasized. The government ensures cooperation of the people by indoctrinating with false ideas about the world. Journalists are imprisoned and beaten for reporting the truth. Internet access is controlled by the government. On January 1st, 2014, Raúl Castro, commander-in-chief of the government, said, referring to the internet, "There is a permanent subversion campaign specially directed to the youth. We perceive subtle attempts to introduce neoliberal and capitalist platforms of thought. In every block there is a home designated as a CDR, Confederation for the Defense of the Revolution. The job of the CDR is to find out everything everybody does and says. They report on events such as someone buying goods off the black market or the expression of anti-revolutionary ideas. A report from the CDR could mean losing your job or going to jail." Castro's revolution was based on Marxist-Leninist views. According to Marx, religion is the opium of the people. Castro didn't attack religion with weapons, but he did it with propaganda. Laws were passed requiring churches to get permission to expand. All these obstacles have discouraged the Cuban people from practicing religion. This, coupled with the economic struggles, has led to an increase in immoral practices. The violation of rights by Castro's government has altered the delicate balance of rights and responsibilities, which exists in every prosperous society. The violation of freedom of speech and press has allowed Castro to keep the nation under his tight grip. The violation of the right to own property has placed the responsibility of distribution of property in the government's hand. The violation of the right of free enterprise has given the government complete control over the Cuban economy. The violation of freedom of worship has caused a decline in moral values. The violations of these rights have created a society unable to forge its own future.
Guarda el corazón